Hello everyone, welcome back to Background Basics. I'm Hannah and this is part 3 of a 4-part series. Today we're going to talk about foliage. This is something that I struggled with for a long time, so I hope some tips in here will be useful to you. Let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to start out talking about trees. In general, obviously this is not comprehensive, but in general there are two types of trees, deciduous and coniferous, and as you can see, they have very different shapes. Deciduous are the ones that drop their leaves in the fall, and coniferous are like the evergreens. So I'm going to start out with the deciduous tree using this picture as my reference. And at first I'm just going to block in a shape using kind of a bluish color. This is going to be the darkest color on the tree. And if you look at like Ghibli films, or Disney films, a lot of times you will see this kind of stylized dark blue used in the shadows of the tree, and I like that, so I kind of incorporate that into my own style. Anyway, as I've said before in my previous episodes, I'm not really concerned about making it look like the reference. I just want it to look like a tree, so I'm using this picture as much as I need to without getting hung up on making it look just like the reference. And now what I'll do is take this Foliage 1 brush. I got this from the Bowater brush pack, which I talked about in the last episode. It's the Charlie Bowater free brush pack, which you can find on Gumroad. But it also came in this Jeremy Finsky brush pack, which is also free on Gumroad. Yes, okay. And I'm just gonna add a little bit of like around the edge, a little bit of detail with this kind of leafy brush. I'm not really going to overdo it with that. I'll be adding some more detail later. All right, and now I'll go back to my texture 2, and I'm going to work on the trunk. Now, one thing about trunks is that people tend to think of these as brown. I prefer to think of them as gray or just different tones of gray. Usually when you do trunks, you can go with a gray brown, a gray green, or even like a gray purple sometimes. The point is definitely don't oversaturate the trunk because that'll just kind of make it look weird and cartoony, I guess. Now once again, I'm starting with the darkest color, and now I'm going to go in with something a little bit lighter and warmer to put these lighter tones on the tree. If you saw my last episode, you know that I like to paint light on dark. It's something that I do quite a lot for just about everything, and this foliage stuff is no exception. So even though the trunk looks brown, I'm really not using very saturated colors. It mostly looks brown because it's contrasting with the cool blue color of the leaves. So now let me take this blue color and I'll go with something a little bit warmer, a little more saturated, and a little lighter. Still got my texture 2. And I'm going to look at the kind of lighter areas of this tree. Not necessarily looking at the highlights. I'm looking more at the negative space and kind of outlining the negative space, leaving areas for the dark blue color to come through. And with the deciduous trees, not all of them, but a lot of them kind of have these kind of round shapes to the leaf clusters. So I'm trying to keep that in mind while I draw it, varying the size of the kind of clusters. That's important, just like I talked about with clouds. in the last episode. I want to vary the size to make it look more organic and natural. And so this is kind of the local color of the tree. So at the end, not a lot of the dark color is going to be showing through, which is fine. That's the way I want it to be. And now I'm going to take an even lighter and warmer color. And I'll do it again. This time I kind of am looking more at the highlight areas. And remember that the light source is up here. So the highlight areas are going to be on more of the tops of these leaf clusters. And you can kind of do this back and forth with the light and dark as much as you want to create more and more, I guess, depth in here. Although I'm kind of only going to use 3 values for now because I like that. Okay, so now for the details, I'm going to use this Hardy elliptical, which came from the Jeremy Fensky pack that I mentioned. And I'll make it pretty small. And I'm going to take just pick colors from the tree that I've done already and use them just to create some little detail leaf areas. I try not to go overboard with this. It's hard not to because it's really fun and it makes the tree look good, but if you go overboard with it, you'll kind of lose your contrast and you'll lose the shapes a little bit. So I try to keep that in mind when I'm doing this stuff. I particularly like to do these little like disconnected leaves sort of on the outline of the tree. It is something that I kind of noticed from Ghibli. The background artist for Ghibli is named Kazuo Oga. I really love his style. It's been a really big influence for me. And I think these kind of disconnected leaf things make it look a lot more painterly. So I'm doing this mostly with the lightest value color that I have, but I'll do a little bit with the medium and dark tones as well. Now, to be completely honest, I think I may have overdone it with these details already, but it is what it is. That's okay. I think that's going to do it for my deciduous tree. So now let's talk about the coniferous one. So the coniferous trees, first I want to say that their trunks typically grow a lot more tall and straight than the deciduous trees. Deciduous trees tend to be a little bit more kind of windy and organic, while the coniferous ones are, like I said, tall and straight. The other thing is that in color, they're usually more blue, kind of a cooler color, and a darker color than the deciduous trees. So I'm going to keep those things in mind while I draw this tree. I'm not sure exactly what kind of conifer this is, but it doesn't matter. So I'm going to start out drawing the trunk, and I'm using, I'm using a dark color, which I want to be my kind of darkest color on here. And now I'll go in with something a little lighter. In this picture, it looks like it's kind of a gray-green, maybe a warmer gray-green color. And just add just a little bit of shading to the trunk. All different kinds of trees have different kinds of bark too, so that's a good thing to look at references for. as if you're looking for a specific tree just to do different kinds of bark. Okay, now I'm going to take this hard elliptical, which I used on the last tree, and I'm going to go for the kind of outline of the conifer here. Now, one thing that's important to think about is that if you look at the tree from the top, it will look round, and its branches are going out in all different directions. So I don't want to think about the conifer as just like two-dimensional like this. Instead, it has this kind of circular radial pattern to the branches. So for that reason, it's going to be denser in the center than it is on the outside. And the leaf shapes, or the branch shapes, I guess, in this one, they go kind of up and out like this. Not all conifers are like this, but this one in this picture is. And the general shape of it is symmetrical. Obviously, not all the branches are symmetrical, but in general, I don't want it to look like super wonky, so I'm trying to keep that symmetrical nature in mind. Also know that the branches do not need to be parallel with each other. I mean, they're generally parallel, but it adds to that kind of organic, natural feeling if they aren't all perfect, of course. And keeping in mind that there are branches in the back and the front as well, just like I said. It's a radial structure. So for that reason, I'm making it denser in the center. Okay, so now just like in the last tree, I'm going to take a lighter color, something that's a little bit warmer, although not too much warmer for this conifer, because like I said, I want it to be a little bit of a cooler hue. And I'll just go in and start defining the individual areas, just like I did in the last one. It's just that this particular tree has different branch shapes. So there are different leaf cluster shapes as well. Much more flat instead of round. And this is where I really need to pay attention to the fact that there are branches coming out in the front. And I'm kind of trying to stay inside the lines of what I've already drawn. I'm not trying to go outside with this because I've kind of already gotten in place the different positive and negative spaces that I want to have, and I don't want to mess up that balance. And once again, I'll just take something of a little bit of a lighter color and just do some highlights. I'm not going to do a super lot, just enough to create a little bit more definition here and there. All right, so there's my conifer. That's done. Now I want to talk about other types of plants that aren't trees. I picked this picture because it shows a lot of different types of shapes, colors, and sizes of plants. even though it may not be like what you would find in the forest naturally in the wild, it still showcases the variety that you can see among different foliage, and that's really important when you're thinking about drawing plants or drawing a mass of plants, is to remember that they come in all different shapes and sizes. And so I've made a little color palette down at the bottom, just picking some of the local colors that are in this picture from the different plants. And I'm going to start out once again with kind of a dark background color because I like to paint light on dark. Oops. And I think I'm going to block with this hard elliptical. I like it because it's kind of smooth. And so these leaves that I'm drawing, which are these ones, are kind of heart-shaped. And I like this brush because it kind of follows the angle of my pen. That makes sense. And I'm just using less pressure to create the darker values, just because it'll do like less opacity. And pay attention to the direction that the leaves are going. Like I pointed out with the conifer, most plants grow kind of radially. So there are branches coming out in the front and the back as well. And so now I'll take something lighter and just do some kind of a little bit of shading. I'm not gonna work super hard on these because that would take a long time. I'm just gonna do a little bit of basic shading. Most plants have, or most leaves, sorry, have a little like seam down the middle that splits the leaf in half. So I kind of like to highlight that in my leaves. And then these ones have kind of a yellowish rim around the edges. I'll take something darker and just add some little like leaf details. I'm not sure what you call these things. Little like pattern in the leaf. And now I'll move on to this one that's a little more reddish, sort of. It's got spiky leaves. And once again, I'm just leaving the dark spaces for the darkest values to be. And it's got some kind of green details. I'll do some kind of darker purple tone details as well. And so if you're doing, you know, a large scene with a lot of plants that need to be in a background, obviously it might not be practical to do something as in-depth as this, but I'm just trying to show you the level of variation that you can get with plants, and how foliage is a lot about creating variety. Don't forget the stems of the leaves either. That can be kind of a nice detail that adds to the plant. Now this one has some little white flowers on it. So I'm going to draw those. So I haven't said all that I want to say about trees and plants and foliage, but I'm going to kind of continue this next week with a speed paint where I just kind of talk through my process, talk about creating depth, because I know that's something that some people requested for me to talk about. A little bit about lighting as well. It's just going to be kind of a whole scene using the tips and tricks that I've introduced in the past few episodes. So I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you next week.